Today I thought it would be interesting to discuss the best team compositions for each map based on both a team that's on comms as well as for solo queue teams without comms, which is how a lot of players enjoy playing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'll also be throwing in a tier list for both of those as well, but this video is going to go a lot further than simply tier listing. I really want to go in depth with how these team comps should be working together and what each individual member of the family should be doing within that composition. Every map in TCM is very different from the last, and there's no one-size-fits-all strategy for winning games. This video is intended to be a resource, so I've included timestamps so you can jump anywhere in the video and also come back to the video and use it as many times as needed. Also, one more caveat before we get into it is, why am I making a video like this in a game that's supposedly just made for casual fun? Well, I go more into that in my TCM is being murdered video that you can watch here, but the simple answer is I play this game a lot, and from what I've been able to gather, there's a significant lack of understanding on how to play family as a team in general. So casual game or not, it is not fun to get steamrolled because you're a more inexperienced player, right? So this video will hopefully serve as a helpful, very in-depth guide on how to play family well, and will also offer pretty good advice even to more experienced players as well. So we're going to start off with Family House. Like I said at the beginning, every map plays in a very unique way, and that's definitely something Gun should be proud of because it's not something you find in too many games. Now, unlike every other map where there's a definitive trio that has a clear advantage, Family House only actually has two family members that are absolutely goated, Hitchhiker and Cook. Between the two of them alone, they lock down the house and make it a nightmare for victims to escape. Hitchhiker spawns very close to the house and in the perfect spot to trap the window for survivors who jump out of it. And with Hitchhiker and Cook on a team, there's almost no other viable option for victims other than jumping out of this window, and it should be expected to happen in every match. Now, you can trap the window from the inside, but that gives the victims the chance to disarm it, and there's no good reason to give them that opportunity. So you are way better off trapping the window from the outside. That way the victim takes damage from the jump, and then the trap is also guaranteed. Plus, it gives you more time to actually catch up to them. When a victim does jump out of the window, it's really important for only one family member to leave the house and chase down the window jumper, ideally in this order: Leatherface, Sissy, Hitchhiker, then Johnny. Cook and Nancy should always stay inside the house because it's too easy for victims to bully them outside. Obviously, if there's more than one window jumper, then two family members will need to go outside, but at least one needs to stay inside to guard the fuse box at all times. Now, besides trapping the window, Hitchhiker also needs to trap the fuse box. The number one reason family loses in TCM is because Hitchhiker doesn't trap the fuse box. So I cannot understate the value of doing this. It is the golden rule. Hitchhikers who try to get fancy and unpredictable with their traps will lose significantly more often. Now, assuming Cook padlocked all the main doors, this leaves Hitchhiker with one more trap that should be used to block off the doorway to the side garden. This trap serves three purposes. The first is that it blocks the only well escape route out of the family house, so that's going to keep victims trapped inside the house or possibly lead to a kill if they try to escape. Another thing it's going to do is keep victims trapped in the side garden if they come up from the side garden basement exit. The last thing this trap does is it's easily movable if the victims happen to break out of any of the doors, especially the door to the back garden, because it only has one padlock on it, so it's good to keep this trap close in case of a situation like that. Hitchhiker is essentially the only character in the game that is able to sort of relock an area after it's already been breached. For Cook, this map is very straightforward. Block the primary three doors, starting with the back garden in case victims rush, then use your hearing ability to limit victim movement. If you use your ability from this exact location, you can monitor 2 exits and 3 basement exits at the same time. So it's an extremely good spot for Cook to anchor. Whenever you have free time as Cook, it's good to patrol the other exits, break down doors so that victims can't use them against you, and feed Grandpa. Now with these two family members, you're pretty much set up to win, and there's no bad third character to pick, but I would recommend them in this order: First off, I'd choose Nancy. With Nancy, you're able to completely trap the house to the point where victims essentially have no options. Nancy can trap the doorway to Side Garden, which offers Hitchhiker an alternative to directly trapping the fuse box, and now instead can trap both staircases leading up to the fuse box and cutting off the upstairs entirely. Nancy can also trap some of the more powerful wall gaps on the first floor. She has a great spawn, so she's anti-rush. She's great at feeding Grandpa, which takes some of the pressure off of Cook, and you can constantly spam her ability to find survivor locations and call that out to your team. For number 2, it's definitely Leatherface. He's able to slow the game down at the start, can get rid of the upstairs barricade that can sometimes completely screw over the team if the fuse box spawns behind it, and he's just incredibly lethal all around. Some things to be careful with is overcommitting in the basement. Once the victims have unlocked a basement door, it's time to get out of the basement and help your team secure the house. Like I said earlier, if there's a window jumper, Leatherface is first in line to be the one who chases them down. Victims are fearful of Leatherface, especially out in the open, and it's likely they'll quickly jump down the well if they're being chased. Sissy and Johnny are definitely the weakest of the bunch on Family House. They spawn incredibly far away, allowing victims to rush way easier. Now, Sissy is the second best family member for chasing window jumpers because she's very difficult to get away from, and it allows for Hitchhiker to stay inside the house so that he can guard the fuse box and reset his traps. Johnny is serviceable on Family House. Using his ability, you can quickly patrol the map to make sure victims aren't hiding or have snuck upstairs. His damage output is nearly unmatched, and he's pretty good for chasing window jumpers too, but he can be infinitely looped by good victims, which is what makes him the least valuable pick in this team comp. Family House is the only family-sided map in the game. With Hitchhiker, Cook, and Nancy, you cover nearly every weak point of the map. It's just a very oppressive team comp, but Leatherface does make a great alternative to Nancy as well. Alright, now we're going to flip the book and we're going to go to Slaughterhouse, which is the only truly victim-sided map in the game. Because it's a victim-sided map, a lot of the general rules do not apply here. Victims have so many options on this map that it creates a nearly impossible to win scenario if they know what they're doing. Typical patrol and defensive strategies will be chewed through here, so against good victims, your best bet is unrelenting offense. I think this team comp will be a little controversial compared to the others in this video, but Hitchhiker, Leatherface, and Sissy are the best bet for reducing escapes against experienced victims on Slaughterhouse. A lot of family players have the opinion that Cook is sort of required in every team comp, but that's assuming that the victim players aren't very good because good victim players blow through padlocks like they're nothing, and on Slaughterhouse, Cook is basically worthless once his padlocks are gone. Victims will lose him in seconds no matter where they are on the map. There's just too many gaps and he becomes irrelevant pretty quickly. Same for Nancy. Johnny has a little bit of a chance here because his time to kill is so quick and his ability gives him some utility in tracking victims, but ultimately it's better to be an agile character on this map. Let's first start out with Leatherface. Unironically, Slaughterhouse has one of the easiest to navigate basements, which translates to it's a pretty good map for Leatherface. Good victims will never let you kill them in the basement, but that doesn't mean you can't slow them down a bit and maybe do some damage. The most important thing you want to keep in mind with Leatherface on Slaughterhouse is that your teammates most likely have bad spawns, especially Sissy and Hitchhiker. So any amount of time you can buy them to get into the map and set up is going to increase your chances of winning. Once the victims have escaped the basement, do not overcommit, get up top and saw the barricades that spawn anywhere in the middle of the map so your teammates are able to move around more freely. These barricades can really cause huge delays in your teammates, so do not underestimate the value of getting rid of them. Then you want to start patrolling the center of the map and pinching victims with Sissy and Hitchhiker's help. Hitchhiker's job on Slaughterhouse is to move quickly. There's a few blood buckets on his way to the center of the map that can be grabbed, but if the victims wake up Grandpa extremely fast, you do not have time to grab the blood, so just ignore it. The first thing you want to do is find the fuse box. If you're lucky, it spawns right outside the main facility door, allowing you to put a trap on the nearby wall gap that can't be seen or countered. If it didn't spawn there, there's 3 other locations you need to search on the map. If you're on comms, you can ask Sissy if it spawned right outside the Slaughterhouse main door to save some time. The other two spawns are near Grandpa and the back corner hut. It's very important that Hitchhiker stays close to his traps so that he can capitalize on victims who step in them and also reset them. Depending on what side of the map Fusebox spawned on is the side that Hitchhiker needs to stay on. Here's the best locations for his traps depending on which side of the map you're defending. The basic concept is trap Fusebox directly or indirectly, meaning the main pathway to it, then trap the two most vital pathways in the area for victims. If at any point the victims attempt to activate the pressure valve, you move one of your less important traps over to the valve. Sissy is somewhat similar to Hitchhiker here. You want to spawn in and grab blood up until Grandpa is awake. The main idea is to get the suffocating grip or exterior alarm Grandpa perks activated. These Grandpa perks are so strong that you should unequip any other Grandpa perk if you see one of your teammates has either of these perks in their loadout. These two perks are so far beyond S tier that another Grandpa perk delaying their activation can completely cost you easily winnable games, so try to be aware of that. Once Sissy is in the map, she's just going to patrol the other side of the map Hitchhiker isn't patrolling. Like I said before, you need to be somewhat aggressive on Slaughterhouse because good victims will win the battle of attrition. They just have too many options for you to be able to defend against them forever. So when you see a victim, you need to relentlessly hunt them until they jump in a well or get deep into the basement. You need to make an effort to constantly check the main doors to Slaughterhouse and facility, as these are usually the first place victims will try to breach. Once a door is unlocked to Slaughterhouse or the facility, only one family member needs to stay in that area. If both sides of the map open up, you want Sissy on one side and Leatherface on the other side. Hitchhiker is way more important staying in this central area of the map because he's the only character in the game that can defend Fusebox and Pressure Valve by himself. No matter how many victims are at the battery or the generator, they can never turn them off if a family member is there. It's nearly impossible. So there's no need to have more than one family member guarding it. If two family members commit to one side of the map, you're actively throwing the match. That's why this team comp is so important here, because everyone is self-reliant. Cook, Nancy, and even Johnny can be easily bullied in a lot of these areas. Next up, we have Gas Station, which is a much more balanced map than the previous two. This is the only map that has a different team comp based on whether or not your team is using comms. If your team is communicating, then Hitchhiker, Leatherface, and Nancy is the way to go. If your team is not on comms, then Johnny is the best replacement for Nancy. Sissy is okay on Gas Station, but the lack of utility or ability to find victims who benefit from stealth a lot on this map makes Sissy way less desirable. Cook is a decent pick for sure, but only if you're on comms. But then again, if you're on comms, Nancy is the more beneficial pick. Her tracking ability is just unmatched on Gas Station. I'll explain why Cook is more problematic here at the end of the video when I go through the family tier list. Now, since we're already on the topic of Nancy, let's talk about her strategy on Gas Station. She's the only family member who currently has a good spawn in the center of the map. Here she can place her three most important traps right at the start in these three locations. These are going to limit the movement of the victims quite heavily and force them more to the outer corners of the map. Now, like I mentioned before, these areas are very strong for stealthy victims. That's why Nancy's tier 3 reveal ability is so strong on this map, because it ruins their stealth almost instantly. So every time that ability is off cooldown, Nancy should be immediately using it again and delegating that information through voice comms. Nancy is much better at defending the car battery side of the map than she is the generator side because there's way less wall gaps, so her patrol route should keep her in this region of the map. Now, like I said earlier, if you are not on comms, Nancy is going to lose a lot of value here, to the extent that I would recommend using Johnny instead. Time to kill is extremely important on Gas Station because there's a lot of conveniently placed wells around the main areas of the map, which allows victims to easily reset quite often. Now, even though Johnny does have the worst spawn out of every family member on this map, he doesn't need time to set up, so all he really has to do is get to the center of the map as fast as possible and lock down his patrol route. The number one mistake Johnny players make is rushing the basement. Good victims are going to just abuse him down there, especially gas station, which is the strongest basement in the game for victims. It's a complete nightmare to navigate and you should avoid it at all costs. So just stick to the patrol route and use his tracking ability as often as possible to quickly locate anyone who's trying to be a sneaky little shitter. Now let's move on to Leatherface, who is really exceptional on this map and can easily stack up a lot of kills. Rule number one though, get the hell out of the basement as fast as possible. Like I said before, gas station basement is a nightmare for family, so stay out of it as much as possible. Leatherface has a pretty simple job on this map. Saw a few really annoying barricades, these two really important crawl spaces specifically because they're very strong for victims, and if you have Nancy, it's going to make it much more difficult for the victims to avoid her traps. Beyond that, you basically just run around the center of the map like a madman, looking for victims to overhead. With good communication and everyone playing their role correctly, it's very difficult for victims to move around freely using this strategy. Lastly, we have Hitchhiker, who plays his role very similar to other maps. The first thing you want to do is leave a trap at this locked gate. It's a popular gate for victims to try to get through, and it's actually a pretty difficult trap to notice. The second thing you want to do is follow the golden rule and put a trap on the fuse box. It will either spawn on the back of this shed or in one of the two bedrooms inside the house. The last place you want to put a trap is on the gate outside of the house, on the gate leading to the generator. The important thing about both gate traps is that they're serving a purpose, but they can be easily moved to another location if they need to be. For instance, if the victims start trying to activate the pressure valve, you can move a trap there, or if the victims breach a gate on either side, you can quickly move your trap to the car battery or the generator. So although these gate traps are very simple in their placement, they're also very dynamic and can be quickly repositioned as needed. By tapping the Family Vision button, you can also quickly check the status of your traps to make sure they're still active, just like Cook can do for his padlocks. As far as positioning goes, Hitchhiker should mainly patrol the generator side of the map. There's a lot of wall gaps in this area and he can apply pressure there that the other family members can't. He also is in a good position to take advantage of any victims that happen to walk through Nancy's traps. If you're running the perk Dinner Bell, you'll be able to see victims when they step in either trap type, which is an added bonus to this team comp. Lastly, we have Nancy's house, which again is a pretty well balanced map once you're familiar with the layout. Now this map has a very definitive best team composition. Cook, Hitchhiker, and Leatherface. They all serve their purposes greatly on this map, so let's start with Cook. The first thing you want to do is take the time to go outside of Nancy's house and padlock the main gate. This is the most crucial move you'll make in the entire match. If Connie or a high proficiency victim gets to this area, they can instantly open or very quickly open the gate if it isn't padlocked, and then it's literally game over. Ideally though, the victim should never reach this point. The second padlock goes on the front door of Nancy's house, and the last padlock goes all the way over to the other side of the map on the car battery gate. This is the general region that Cook is going to patrol for the rest of the match. There's two very easily defendable doors to the car battery, and one has a padlock on it. Cook can just anchor in this area, spam his hearing ability, and occasionally check the generator or the fuse box and pressure valve if they spawned in this region as well. Moving on, Hitchhiker has a pretty straightforward job on Nancy's house. You want to, as fast as possible, locate the pressure valve and fuse box spawns. They can spawn in quite a few different areas, so practice getting used to their spawn points. You can use Family Vision to spot them easier. You also want to trap the generator because it just makes it even more difficult for the victims to apply any pressure. If the fuse box spawns somewhere in the center region of the map, then Hitchhiker is going to want to patrol that area. However, if it spawned inside of Nancy's house, then Hitchhiker will patrol that area instead. Finally, there's Leatherface, who's going to pressure the basement a bit, but definitely leave once the victims have gotten out. As always, do not overcommit to anything. As Leatherface, you're going to be playing off of Hitchhiker. If he's in the center of the map watching Fusebox, then you're going to be patrolling Nancy's house, and vice versa if Fusebox happen to spawn in Nancy's house. On the side of Nancy's house, there's a locked gate. It's important to keep an eye on this gate as it's basically a back door into Nancy's house, so make sure that it's being watched. Both the family members patrolling the center of the map as well as the one watching Nancy's house should be checking this as often as possible. Moving on, there's really only 2 barricades that Leatherface needs to worry about and destroy on this map, so make sure to get rid of those, and you're basically pretty much set up to win if everyone plays their role correctly. Now we're quickly moving on to the tier list. I've arranged these tier lists based on being on comms and also not being on comms, as that difference creates a huge disparity in the strength of some of these characters. To start off, it should come as no surprise that Hitchhiker is an S tier pick. He's just invaluable in any situation, whether on comms or not. He's anti-rush, he's the only family member that can trap objectives, and he's self-reliant so he can't be bullied. His base attributes are great, his base movement speed is great, his skill tree options are great. He's really the GOAT, and any match with a good Hitchhiker player is going to be significantly more favorable than one without him. Next up, we have Leatherface, who has been hit with a big nerf to his insta-kill capability, but also got some quality of life buffs to his saw start time and the speed of destroying barricades. He's still amazing, and against less experienced victims, he can wipe out the entire team before they even get out of the basement. Whether on comms or off comms, Leatherface stays fairly consistent in strength. He has a little bit of a learning curve compared to the other family members, so I'm gonna make a guide about that soon to help players understand his mechanics more. Additionally, he spawns in the basement, so that's a very unique aspect that can sway an entire match right from the start. Basically, you just can't go wrong having Leatherface on a team. Then we have Cook in A tier with comms, but goes down to a B tier without comms. Cook has an insane amount of utility, but he also has a lot of limitations, especially in a chase. So as great as he is, he's still fundamentally a support character, and if your teammates are not very good at the game, you're going to just get bullied playing as Cook, no matter how good of a player you are. So he's very overestimated in the community because of how helpful he is in a strong team that's on comms, but it's just that does not translate to playing solo, where you need to almost completely rely on your teammates to take advantage of his utility. He also doesn't play too well into the rush meta outside of Family House and Nancy's house. Moving on, we have Johnny in B tier for both tier lists. Although Johnny can't one-shot like Leatherface, his damage output is still nearly unmatched, and in a lot of ways he's more intimidating than Leatherface. He can track victim movement, he can use serrated for bleed damage, and he's a lot more stealthy than Leatherface. And even though he can't pass through gaps much like Cook and Nancy, his insanely fast time to kill makes up for it because he only needs a few hits. Obviously, every family is better with comms, but Johnny stays pretty consistent across the board. What you really have to watch out for is getting too arrogant with Johnny and pushing into the basement, where he's much weaker and probably is just going to end up throwing the match. Next up, we have Sissy, who definitely has some core issues. Her poison has no real identity to it, it's too weak in every regard to have an impact. Ultimately, the main thing to take away from playing Sissy is that everything she can do can be done better by another family member. Hitchhiker is faster, does more damage, and has infinitely more utility with his traps. Cook and Nancy can both feed Grandpa just as well as Sissy, but again with more utility. The only thing Sissy does well is play into an already good team comp that has utility, which lets her sort of be a hunter who just finds a target and then never lets off the gas and relentlessly pursues them. Sissy definitely needs more of an identity around her poison. Right now, it just doesn't offer much utility or damage, and the devs need to work on that. In last place, we have Nancy, who, a lot like Sissy, just gets power crept in a lot of ways by the other family members. Hitchhiker's traps are way better. He can place them anywhere and they do heavy damage. Nancy's traps do 5 damage at base and 7.5 damage with a tier 3 perk. She's extremely limited on where she can place her traps, they're easy to see, and it's very difficult and impractical for her to capitalize on her traps when a victim steps in one. All they have to do is go back through the gap before Nancy reaches them. So Nancy has to almost entirely rely on other family members to get value from her traps, which is just insanely impractical. Like Sissy, her attributes are just really bad, with a lot of forced blood harvesting that just heavily limits her build potential. The one saving grace of Nancy is her tier 3 ability to see the location of victims. On comms, this ability can be a game changer, but off of comms, it's a lot weaker and sometimes just straight up worthless. Nancy and Sissy are the only two family members that do need a buff because they're just weaker versions of other characters. So there's my baseline guide on what families should be doing in order to have a better gameplay experience. There's a lot of content out there about silly strategies that can be funny for sure, but in most situations they're not going to work, so this is meant to be more of a practical video. Hopefully you found the video entertaining or learned some things. If so, consider leaving the video a like, as it's a big help and it also lets me know you want more content like this. Also, if you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.